Okay, great. I think we can get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the iWiSH-Talks, where we highlight the voice of top leaders working to advancing women's health research. My name is Francesca Vacante, and I am the founder and the president of the iWiSH-Talks. Today is a really great honor to host this exciting session here together with Zara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zehra Yildirim. I'm chair of the iWiSH-Talk, so very excited to be here today.
That's great. So we are very much looking forward to hear from our inspiring speaker today. Hi, Dr. Dzau. Welcome to the iWiSH-Talks, and we really look forward to hear your presentation. But before we dive into this discussion, let me share with you a couple of slides just for who is new to our events. So the iWiSH-Talks has been launched in early 2023. There are now more than 2,000 members internationally, and essentially this is a platform that is a sort of bridge and as well as a sort of connector in between early careers and top leaders in the fields of science and healthcare. And so if you'd like to join us, please send us an email or just log in through this QR code. This is our amazing team. We are growing really internationally around the world, and we are really excited. We have very great mentors supporting us, dedicating their time. We have Dr. Hu that is right now connecting and already joined our session. And we also are very excited because we we open other chapters internationally. So we have a new iWiSH-Talks UK. So please stay tuned for new events upcoming from this specific chapter. And we have a lot of different team members logging in from the UK right now. So thank you so much, everyone. And if you are interested to open a new chapter in your organization or your institution, please reach out to us. We would love to support you on this. And our next talk will be in April 29. We will have the pleasure to discussing with the dean of the School of Medicine here at Stanford, Dr. Minor. So feel free to register with this QR code and save the date. A very big thank you to all our sponsors, the Stanford Cardiovascular Institute for all the support throughout the years, and Bizim. We have Vivi Luo here connected with us. Please connect with them if you are interested, and BioRender for their amazing pictures, and Stanford University Southwest Postdoctoral Association. So today's agenda, we will have after this brief welcome, we will really much look forward to Dr. Dzau's presentation about women's health research. We will also have a couple of moderated Q&A questions, and then we will open to a live Q&A from audience. So please make sure to have your question uploaded in the chat box, and we will ensure to read it for you. And so it's a really great pleasure to welcome Dr. Dzau for this inspiring conversation. Dr. Dzau is the president of the National Academy of Sciences, is the vice chair of the US National Research Council, and he's a distinguished professor at Duke University. And Dr. Dzau really in his career made really impactful discoveries in the clinical and research sides. He's very well known for his discoveries in vascular gene therapy, and some of his discoveries are now in a phase 3 clinical trial for preventing bypass failure field, and also for his seminal work in the renin-angiotensin system and how to manage blood pressure. But in addition to these scientific and medical discoveries, he is very well known for his strong advocacy for advancing women's health, and also for his mentoring and inspiring activity in highlighting early careers. And I would like to also say that Dr. Dzau really kindly accepted to be a mentor of the iWiSH. And really thank you so much, Dr. Dzau. This is a really example of how you are so active in advancing early careers. So with this, I would like to give you the floor, and we are really much forward looking to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesca. What a great pleasure. You know, when I came to Stanford under Joe Wu's invitation, for the cardiovascular symposium, I met Zara and Francesca. I said, wow, these are two dynamic young women. I got to listen to them. And then they tell me about iWiSH. And then when I had a chance to learn some more about this, I must admit, I was blown away, truly impressed. But you know, what really inspired me is the fact that this work is done by grassroots, people like yourself, leaders that mobilize so many other people thinking, working towards a good cause, in this case, women's health. So, of course, it's easy for me to say no. No, it's easy for me to say yes, despite the fact that I've got a lot of things going on. And I'm just so glad I have a chance to tell you about at least some of my thoughts on women's health. So I really look forward to having a good chat with you. But I want to thank Francesca and Zira again for your inspiring leadership. And really, in so many ways, you're going to change the research community, the paradigm, and important advance women's leadership in this area. Now, I know this audience is more researchers than clinicians, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the science, the research, and obviously how it affects, of course, clinical medicine. But more importantly, I want to talk about the broader issue about what we must think about in terms of addressing women's health, and of course, ultimately, how do you develop leadership, particularly women leaders. And a lot of work I'm referring to will be the National Academy's work, because we've believed in this cause for a long, long time. So, can I have the next slide, please? Now, we come a long, long way. You all know about suffrage and where women is in the society. And unfortunately, they still are in some part of our world, as the second class, but I think we've come a long way. So, but if you look back on it was not till 1972 in women's health when Supreme Court says we approve contraceptives and right to legalize abortion. And then in 1977, FDA says, but we can include women with childbearing potential from drug trials because we're worried about side effect and potentially liability. So that sets us back a long way, and even now. But in 1993, NIH finally come around to say in the Revitalization Act that mandates inclusion of women and minorities. And then FDA at that time also rescinds the guideline from banning women from research. So that's a really important step going forward. And in 2010, under President Obama, the Affordable Care Act improves preventive services, mammograms, women visits, birth control, breastfeeding support. To me, that was a very big step going forward. And then Congress in 2012 requires FDA to report sex, race, and ethnicity. So in many ways, that sets the stage for where we are today. In 2016, NIH says, okay, we need to remember sex is a biologic variable. It determines biology. So when you study biology, whether it is mitochondria, whether it's epigenetics, you name it, you need to understand the influence of sex and therefore the determination of biology. That's a really important forward. And of course, these days you write grants, you want to be able to truly look at the influence of sex on the biologic and therefore disease. But in 22, we had a major setback. Certainly for me, it was the Dobbs decision on eliminating right to legalize abortion. It was a very sad day for all of us. And of course, it's the whole issue about the right to equitable health for women. And so at the Academy, we did a lot of work addressing this issue of reproductive health. When Biden comes into the White House, there's a light shining by saying we need to put a lot more money into women's health research. And I'll come back talk about this. But of course, today we know that we face lots of new challenges. Challenge to say gender identity in federal policies. Challenge to say what documents and programs that we must therefore look at gender as two sexes, challenge gender affirmative care, and actions against diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have a lot of work to do. We've made a lot of progress. We have setbacks. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Hence, I give iWiSH a tremendous amount of credit and support to say keep moving, because we got to do the right thing for the population, for society, and for women. Next slide. Now, the National Academy has always been very committed to this area. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we've done and how we can bring all these things together to today's situation, environment. Next slide. So we were founded in 1970 as part of the National Academy of Sciences. National Academy of Science was founded in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln, and Congress chartered to advise the government on actual science. Just imagine, during Civil War, they want an independent body, scientifically based, to advise objective scientific issues, which is wonderful. And in 1970, because health has become such an important issue, we founded the Institute of Medicine within the National Academy of Sciences. And it's basically the third academy, because over time, NAS evolved into NAS, National Academy of Engineering, and National Academy of Medicine officially in 2015. Now, we're very proud of the Academy because people like Dzau, like Lloyd Minor are members, and we elect 100 members each year. We have over 2,000 members, and we have now probably 100 Nobel laureates, many National Medal of Science, Lasker awardees, but importantly, we have leaders who care about evidence-based advice and solutions for the nation. So we do a lot of work in science, in policy, in healthcare. What you see on the right-hand side is what we do. We do well by bringing together best minds. We advise the nation, advise globally. We generate report. We set the agenda for policy. If you look at this slide, what you can see is some of the reports that we made that changed literally medicine and health. Like in 1999, we had a report to say to err is human. People are making medical errors that result in death. First time ever. And today we know about the movement of patient safety and quality. In 1986, we say AIDS is really now an epidemic, not just affecting small segments of population. And that mobilized so many actions, including PEPFAR. In 1988, we say, let's map the human genome well before we have the ability, even genetic is not doable. In 2017, 2020, we say, let's have ethics around guiding the use of genome editing. And then more recently, during COVID-19 and Ebola, we're the secretary to the G20, looking at financing globally, pandemic, etc. Next slide. In women's health from day one, 1970, when we were at a time of rapid social change, we focused on women's health. And our initial report, you can see 75, 98, and 99 were all about reproductive health, contraception, and maternal health. But in fact, the last 20-some years, we broadened this to say, as you can see, 2001, sex is a biologic determinant. We need to study sex, it matters in biology. We also did a report to say we need to include women in clinical trials. We did a report to say we must study chronic diseases in women. And in 2024, we say we need to invest a lot more NIH in women's health research. And I'm going to talk about some of this in my talk. Next slide. So where are we in women's health? Next slide. So as I said, in 2010, the IOM then, and now called NAM, producers report, progress pitfalls, and promise. We're commissioned by Congress and Health and Human Services look at what is going on in women's health and what the government needs to do in policy, regulation, and organization. And you can see we had 6 questions, big ones. Are we studying the most relevant determinants of health? Biologic. Are we focused on the most appropriate relevant condition endpoints for women? Are we studying the most relevant groups of women, thinking about menopause, reproductive, adolescent, and even childhood? Are we using the most appropriate research methods? I would say that until more recently, people study even the reference genome or cell cultures without thinking, is it from a woman or man? They could be different. And more recently, until recently, we do a lot of clinical trials, mainly enrolling men. And if you look at AI, the algorithm, the database are mainly white men. So the answer is we're not using all the right methods. Are we translating to practice? I'll talk about that. And then are we communicating patterns? I'll say all these areas, 16 years ago, we asked those questions, and these questions remain relevant today. We still have a lot of work to do. Next slide. So, but what we did learn is that we should look at women's health as entire life course. It's just not one age group or the other, but it's from preconception, in utero, to childhood, to adolescence, to adulthood, in which case you have middle life and elderly. And when you look at that whole spectrum and understanding that intervention early makes a whole difference to health of population and women, it's important. So the life course idea. But also we need to understand all these things influenced by external and internal factors. External factors we know are social determinants, behavior, environment, and policy. But biologic factors influence genetic, molecular, cellular, and physiologic levels. So in today's women's health, we have to look at this from the whole picture. Cross life course, looking at external factors and biologic factors. And that's where the research is going. Next slide. So I want to talk about 4 areas. One is we need a lot more research to understand specific conditions for women and their needs. We need to make sure clinical trials reflect the population with, in fact, inclusion of women and of specific conditions. We need to make sure there's research funding, organization, and prioritization of women's health. And of course, importantly, all of you, workforce and leadership. Until we have major leaders in research, in clinical care, in policy by women, we're not going to reach our goal. So all those 4 areas I want to talk about very briefly. Next slide. So first, I want you to think about 3 different conditions. Conditions which are only in women, not in men. Conditions which are highly prevalent in women, a lot more in women than in men. Conditions which are common in women and men, but their expression of disease is different. Let me start with the top. Endometriosis, gynecologic cancer, maternal health. These are conditions only in women, not in men. So we need to study these conditions and understand them. Autoimmune disease, Alzheimer's, a lot more common in women than men. You look at lupus, autoimmune disease, and Alzheimer's, 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women. So you need to study why are they more prevalent. And this is something that is a disease burden for women that we need to find treatment solutions for. And then conditions which are differentially expressed in women. I'm a cardiologist, as Joe is. I can tell you that for a long time, women would come to emergency room with kind of vague symptoms of indigestion, maybe discomfort, chest pain, and we will say to them, you know what, you're fine. Go and take some antacids, go and rest or whatever, and misdiagnose a cardiac ischemic heart disease. Because women express their disease somewhat different from men. Same for mental health. And so these three conditions need to be separated and studied in detail if we want to advance in women's health. Next slide. Well, a big part of the challenge, as I see it, is we don't have enough data on women's clinical condition and what works in them, whereby lots of decisions are being made with lack of evidence. And so it's important that we highlight the need to include women in clinical trials. In our study in 2022, we look at the impact of inclusion of women and racial ethnic minority subgroups in biomedical research. The good news is since 1993, a lot more women are included, but still they're the minority compared to men. Secondly, even if you look at the large trials, there's very little data disaggregation to look at specific analysis between men versus women. And third, there are subgroups that remain not to be studied. Pregnant lactating individuals, sexual gender minority populations, and of course, racial ethnic groups. And of course, the big problem is racial ethnic diversity is still largely stagnant. Let me say a word about pregnant lactating individual. 7 out of 10 pregnant women take some medicines, or lactating women. That means they are taking medicines, but we don't know the impact of medicines on the efficacy and safety. Why? Because your biology changes, your metabolism changes, so you can't expect to know exactly what dose to give to women when they're pregnant, and you're also worried about what kind of untoward effect. So by not studying them, we're having a black hole, and lots of women are taking medication without knowing. So we have strongly advised and did the study say, you must study this group. If you're worried about, in fact, the impact on side effect or liability, let's upfront make sure that we address this issue so that more women are included. And same for gender, of course, population needs to be studied. So clinical trial diversity is a very important issue. Next slide. And funding. At the end, funding matters. We all know this. And very sadly to say, women's health funding by NIH is a small percent of NIH funding, somewhere around the 20% or so. And if you look at each disease, I talk about predominantly differentially impact women. Alzheimer's, 2/3 are women, but only 12% of research goes to study focused on women. Cardiovascular disease, 44% women have some kind of cardiovascular disease, but 1/3 enrolled our trials, and 4% of the coronary artery disease budget focus on women. If we look at specific condition women, endometriosis that occur 1 in 10, lifetime prevalence, $20 million in funding. Prostate cancer, 1 in 8, now it's over $300 million in funding. So you can see the issue here. And of course, to date, if you had a specific women study to go to NIH, there's no institute. You had to apply it under National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. And gynecologic conditions only receive 9% of that budget. So when you apply to NIH, you apply to every institute, and they're not always the best and most knowledgeable to assess the issue of sex versus overall disease. So I think many people in research in women's health struggle to find the right fit across NIH institutes and centers. Next slide. So we were asked by Congress to do a report which we released a little bit over a year ago. And the report was really looking at where are we standing in NIH research for women's health, and have we captured the most important issues? As I said, Actually, I was wrong in my number, less than 9% NIH spending focused on women's health in the 10-year period. And the funding decreased its share of overall research because there's steady increase in research funding. We recommend that NIH need to have a high priority for women's health research and a new research institute. We recommend that substantial increase in funding to a tune of over $12 billion over the period of years. We want a lot more interdisciplinary research and being submitted to help across all the institutes and centers. We need to look at grant funding review processes that's really more, shall we say, understanding of women's health research. And of course, NIH need to invest in women's health workforce development. Next slide. So what are the next steps? First, we have to really understand that sex is a biologic determinant. In all the research we do, we have to think about the sex and how it influences biology and disease, and therefore being able to separately study them, compare them, but also in clinical trials, disaggregate the data. We have to address health disparities related to sex and gender. So that means we have to put it into professional education training. We have to recognize biological and environmental factors, and we make sure there's equitable funding. And then we need to understand the influence of sex and gender on causes of disease and morbidity. I talked about this already, studying women's, pregnant lactating women, and NCDs, women-specific conditions, behavioral social science, and modernized data, research design, policy reform, investment in training, and career pathways. Next slide. So my last point, when you do all this, you must remember that social factors influence a lot in health outcomes, especially women. Next slide. Because this slide show you that health is socially patterned. Women face specific challenges: sexual violence, homicide, intimate partner violence. There's silence and stigma surrounding menstruation. There's, in fact, structural issues of oppression, impact of sexism, conflating women's health with reproductive health, and of course, economic inequality and education disparities. These factors are intersectional, compounded by systemic issues facing populations. So we need to think and bring this into our equation when you do the research, we treat patients. Next slide. So where do we go from here? Next slide. We are pushing very hard to say the entire innovation ecosystem, from universities to hospitals, to funding agencies, to philanthropy, to tech transfer, to industry, and to market, all need to embed women's health in their thinking. That means that when you are designing a study in research, idea conception, and when your organization decided what to do, research prioritization, think about women's health and sex as a biologic determinant. When you design clinical research, make sure that you actually look at the impact of both sexes. And when you look at clinical trial, make sure they are properly sized and represented. And then when you actually look at what happens to a market, make sure that the research and the product provides products which are accessible, affordable to all women. And then you need to be able to study after the drugs in the market. Have we really met those goals, and what are surprises? So in many of the things we've been doing, one of the things that we've been doing and working on this back in 2024 is a joint at White House led with journal editors, 58 cardiology journal editors, to say, are we going to prioritize women's health? And we create a joint statement endorsing guidelines and framework for reporting sex and gender research. That's the starting point. I would imagine funding agencies need to do the same thing, and research need to think about the same area, embedding women's health in the entire innovation ecosystem, not just one part or the other. Next slide. So it's really important to elevate research, women in leadership, in academia, in clinical work, in research, but also in private sector. Here I'm focused on research careers. We have to strengthen recruitment and retention, mentorship program, protected research time, fund research time for early career development, and more dedicated support for clinician scientists, especially women. And the leaders academia, such as myself, Joe Wu, Lloyd Minor, and many others, must identify and support women applying for grants. We must supplement and bridge funding when they need it. We must continue to nominate women for internal, external awards and opportunity to be visible, give them a lot more opportunity to be visible and collaborative, and of course, host cross-institution conference-based network events. My last slide. We continue to work hard on this. You can see this picture in the Oval Office, where I'm now on the second to the left with President Biden and Joe Biden, which they signed the executive memorandum for women's health. And you can see Maria Shriver there, Monica Bertonelli, my successor, and others. And we continue to work on a whole variety of areas you can see in this slide, including now I'm on the steering committee on the Milken Institute of Women's Health, chaired by Joe Biden. And we have launched a Scholar in Global Health Women's Research program funded by Gates Foundation in Africa. And we have a committee of women in science, engineering, and medicine and national academies, which would look at how to make sure we support women in science, engineering, medicine, how to advance their career, etc. Next slide, last slide. So my title is Call to Action for Cells to Society. We need to understand and improve women's health for entire cells to society. And we held such a major meeting at National Academy, and we published such a paper in JAMA Internal Medicine. I would say at every point of a continuum, we have to think about women's health. We have to look at outcomes, experience, and knowledge. We need to be participating more specifically with patient and community to drive inequity or to ameliorate inequity and drive investment. Leadership and financial investment is so important. And that's where you guys all come in, and wavering commitment to effort and momentum despite all the challenge we face today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dzau. Really, I'm going to stop sharing here. It has been a truly inspirational excursus and journey in the history of women's health. Really, your experience is really valuable in here in this group. So you touched a lot of important topics and of discussion, and we are. I guess I can start with the first question. That is also more personal to you. So we were wondering what did inspire you to commit so much on women's health, and during your probably at the beginning of your journey in this field, if you encounter any challenge that is maybe cultural or structural, and if you can just share with us.
Yes, very good. Well, first, it goes without saying, it's the right thing to do. I think we're all in medicine, in health, academia, do the right thing. And therefore, we must do what's most important. And there's nothing more important than women's health. 52% of the population. But you ask me what kind of stimulated me to get more active in this? Well, I mentioned to you I was a clinician cardiologist. And I can remember a patient which I made a misdiagnosis. She came in the emergency room. I was called to go and see that patient. I was a cardiology fellow, and they want to know, does she have ischemic heart disease? The EKG was a little ambivalent, and in my own bias, I say, well, women have less heart disease than men. That was then clearly the understanding, right? Back then in Framingham, many studies we say women are protected from heart disease until they reach menopause. Not true. So I misdiagnosed the patient, sent her home, only to have her readmitted, the next day with a massive MI. And thank God she survived, but it was a really important lessons for me. Since then, of course, we've been saying better and better knowledge to know that we have just been so biased about what women have certain disease or not, biased about not using research to develop evidence, and then finally not recognizing that women and men present differently. We now know, of course, women have microvascular disease more than large coronary artery disease. So consequently, you're not able easily to look at the usual factors that you have to study differently, looking at microperfusion, and of course the drugs you use are different and the intervention are different. So I would say that was a big lessons learned for me that I cannot forget. Now, along the way, I've been very blessed. As many of you know, I trained at the Brigham Women's Hospital and Mass General. And by the way, I have wonderful years at Stanford as well. And, I think that my mentors and program directors were very progressive. Certainly, Dr. Eugene Braunwald, Marshall Wolf, we had a good representation of women and also of underrepresented minority. One of my classmates is Joanne Wilson, who was African American woman, interesting, from North Carolina, coming to Boston, a share crop, a share crop. You know what I'm saying, right? Family. She's the granddaughter of that, and so those things inspire me. But what really inspired me is meeting Paula Johnson. Paula Johnson, African American woman, studied cardiology. And, I was her chief resident when she was an intern. And she and I did work together. I was an attending where she is just finishing fellowship in cardiology. But she went to get a MPH in School of Public Health. And she wanted to study women's health. And when she talked to people, senior advisors attending, they say, no, there's no future in this. So she came to me, and if you look up some of her interviews, she'll tell you about that experience. I thought she must continue this, and she inspired me. And what's wonderful about this is that not only has she made a great career, I was inspired to create a women's health division at the Brigham, and Paula was a division chief. I remember mentoring her very early days about what to do. She says, I don't know how to be a division chief. I said, and especially among cardiologists, how do I see women with heart disease? And today she is the president of Wellesley College, as you know. So I think these are many of the life's experience that I've learned along the way, personal experience, failures, mistakes, and sometimes inspirational opportunities.
Yeah, Dr. Dzau, I think this is truly inspirational, and we are very, very lucky to be mentored by you. We feel, incredibly lucky in this sense, and we want to ask you actually. So our experience with you, as you briefly mentioned in the beginning, was incredible. That you were extremely open and you immediately, engaged with us. So we want to learn for women and also for men in our audience, what is the most effective ways to engage with male leaders like yourself as an active partners in promoting and advocating for women's health in science. And what do you think is the value of the programs such as the iWiSH Talks in promoting this cultural shift?
Yeah, I would say that in today's world, there's a lot more of women leadership, uh, women's health, and women's biology. A lot more awareness. That's all very good. To begin with, I think if you look at medical schools, more than 50% of a class are women. And I bet you also in your research arena, and even if I look at my own surroundings where I work, I would say the majority, especially the smart ones, are all women. So I think that number one I would say is you got to do a great job in demonstrating your ability. You don't want to say, I want to be treated specially, although you want to be treated fairly, right? But you need to demonstrate how good you are, and you are excellent. And I don't doubt for a nanosecond for any one of you, if you go ahead and do what you want to do, you can be excellent. So people need to value your understand leadership. That opens the door. And let's face it, I'm an immigrant, and I had to go through in a different way how to get there. So I think that's number one. So excellence is what you always need to represent. Secondly, is finding the right role model and mentors. That's so, so important. And again, for myself, had it not for people who gave me an opportunity, believe me, I'll be still back in Hong Kong doing whatever I'm doing. And I never planned to do what I do today, but it's the opportunity. And people say, you know what? You're not too bad. How about if we do this? And I think it's important for you to say, that's an opportunity or not, and to do it and do excellence. Third, always remember what you're all about, which is what you want to do, which is for the good of society. And this is where women comes in. You have a unique perspective. And when you do all these things with excellence, you must remind yourself and people around you, including your boss and mentors, in terms of women, give them a voice, which is so important. And I do think that things are getting much better in having voices. Now, voices are very important, and demonstration of success is important because we all know that even today, you know, a small percent of professors are women, right, in the medical center compared to men, and much smaller percent are deans and leaders, although it's getting better. So you need to be sure that you work hard in your advocacy. Don't be shy to speak up. People respect you when you say, boy, that Francesca and Zara and others are so good. And when they talk to me, I need to listen to them, right? Versus, hey, you didn't do enough for us here and there, right? They say, okay, I got to avoid this, right? So there's a lot of bias, as you know. I say even things are better. As I said, if you look at the number of women, Asian Americans who are leaders, you talk about 15%, 20%, where if you look at the number of students and faculty, that's a totally different story. Why? Because there's still a bias. Russell Reynolds, which is a firm that look at headhunting and governance, have published a study that says, you know what? The glass ceiling you see is bias. Why? Because they define what a leader is. Well, what's a leader? A leader is someone who's assertive, who's outspoken, who can make decisions, right? Isn't that what you think about, right? That's kind of a male alpha model. For Asians like myself, most of us are more reflective, quieter, but thoughtful. That's also leadership, right? But people have biases selecting them. And I have to tell you that over the years, I've adapted my methodology. So you see me as outgoing, but when I really am more of an introvert, when we did a Myers-Briggs test about 15 years ago because I was a CEO at Duke. I was surprised that I actually came up as an introvert. Why? Because my intuitive approach would be, this is what I would do, but then I override it by compensating, being willing to say, I got to really be adapting to the environment. So I think in what I'm saying to you is be the strong voice, understand the bias, but adapt to environment as well. So those are the thoughts I have. Excellence first, right? Get highly respected. Always bring the women's perspective in every conversation you have, and find the right people, mentor around you, who can believe in you, role models, and then make sure you elevate the voice so that the bias is eventually overcome.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Dzau. These are so important take notes for all the young researchers and educators in this discussion here. We have a question actually from our biggest supporter, Dr. Dzau, as you know. So Joe, he's asking, Victor, how do you encourage more students in the US, men and women, to go into STEM compared to other countries?
Yeah, this is a big, big issue. I've been working more recently on the issue of trust in science. And I think the conclusion clearly is there are many different conclusions. The big one is people not appreciating the value of science and the rigor of scientific methods, right? Where does it start? With STEP, right? Many people will tell you stories about how they got into science because they met a science teacher, they did this or that. But if every citizen understands science, the value of science and what they do for their everyday life, and the rigor of science and scientific method, the integrity of science, will not have as much problem. So what we do, one is communicate to public, but communicate not as a scientist, as someone with great modesty, to talk to the people in community, what their concerns are, what their needs are, and then address some of the issues they're worried about, like vaccine, etc. And get trust that way. Secondly, is to be able to find many ways to reach out to the public to be sure that people understand what science is. And that's why when I say people don't trust science, they are those who don't fully understand science and don't really understand the rigor of science. That's when I say you got to start very early, right? When I was studying, not only do we have STEM education, but we have civics. Then we understand the importance of civic, society, and science. I think we need to do a lot more in our country in those areas. So you're absolutely right. Now, this is a tall order, as you can imagine, right? Because we now talk about a polarized society, and education is decentralized down to the county level. The education boards are made of sometimes you with an agenda, but we got a long way to go. But we're not going to get there unless we address the STEM education. And I'm so glad that so many of you are interested in science.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dzau. This is truly inspiring and amazing to hear. I'm Themis, I'm the outreach director for the iWiSH, and now we can also start the Q&A session with the people questions. And while folks are gathering their thoughts in the chat, I would really like to touch on what you mentioned about leadership earlier. What do you think are these key strengths that all of the emerging scientists and early careers need to cultivate in order to be able to grow into effective and impactful leaders?
Yeah. Tammy, I'm going to try to pronounce your name. Themistocles. You like
Correct.
it?
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, that's really important, right? I think first of all, you have to understand what leadership is, right? Leadership is a desire to serve. People call servant leaders, not to be in head of everybody but to in fact be part of everybody to be able to serve. That's a key feature. If you're going to leadership and only are interested in enhancing yourself, you're not a leader. So I think that's the key issue. It's the fundamental core beliefs in serving, impacting society, making a difference. Now, this is important because people are going to believe you or not believe you when they see who you are and what you say, right? If you truly humble, want to serve, but being able to inspire and to make decisions, of course, people would say, that's a good leader. So I think the fundamental issue is to understand why you want to be a leader more than anything else, right? Second is leadership has to have a vision where you want to take the organization. And you do that as a combination of understanding your organization, your society, where people are, because you can't simply say, I want to be there. You need to understand why people are where they are and how they are able to think along with you. And then you need to be able to think strategically how you can move forward. So that's called inspiring people, getting them to follow your idea. Third is to have a vision, as I already said, right? And then eventually, really important is form a team. I mean, my entire life, in fact, and everything I do, including research lab, is having good teams. I see Joe has a big team, you know? So because when you have a team, people who all believe in the same thing, you can work collectively towards the right goal, right? So surrounding with great people and then being able to make the right judgment, listening to people and make the right judgment to make the right decision. So you can just put that in your research career every day. You can very easily see in your lab if you really, people very quickly see your leader because you know what, you care about the people around you, you help them, you organize things, and suddenly they say, wow, Francesca, you're really good organizing this stuff. We can ask you to do more. Zera gets people together. You know, wow, this is good for the lab. This is good for the department, right? That's a starting point. Because I have to say that, you know, I've never planned to be doing what I'm doing, but every turn I've been asked to say, okay, hey, why don't you do this? Then you have to decide whether this is what you want to do, right? Some people prefer to be in lab, don't bother me. Other people want to be there. That's a personal choice. And with every choice, you need to make trade-offs and sacrifices, right? I know what my trade-offs are. I still work in the lab, but boy, my trade-off is that I got to do a lot of leadership stuff and less time in the lab. And that's my trade-off. But you can have to decide what your trade-offs are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dzau. I'm Anu. I will ask the next. So, I really like the talk, especially inclusion of women in clinical trials. Since we are all in AI age, my question was, do you envision AI taking an important role in reflecting the diversity of women in future?
Oh, yeah.
And because I know we have inclusion in clinical trials, but at other levels, I don't even know at the data
Yeah.
collect, the omics layer, what does an AM think
Well,
about?
there lies the issue, isn't it, right? If you look at the AI today, whether you're looking at machine learning, whether you look at generative AI, it's all depend on data and algorithms. And the data, everybody knows the data you collect is going to affect, you know, your algorithm. And everybody knows that many famous studies where, in fact, if you look at criminal recidivism, that all the information about white man or black man, and you know, so there's a lot of bias. So I think to be aware that we need to collect, first of all, on the ground, collect equitable data, right? Representative data. But also people who are doing AI, knowing what data they put into it and what's missing, understand what the shortcomings are. I do believe in the future, AI, agentic AI, many others are going to be able to shall we say, acknowledge some of this problem to begin with. So in other words, when they put out the answer, they would be proactively saying, acknowledging where the limitations are, versus today, you just get the answer. So I think for people working in it, just the awareness of trying to make up for these shortcomings and design in such a way is really important. There's no question AI is going to change our life. Anybody who thinks AI could change must live on the moon or somewhere, right? So we better make sure that we really get the best out of it.
Hello, Dr. Dzau.
Hi.
I'm Nadia. Nice to see you again. We met a few years back in one of the early career lunches at Stanford. Great talk. I wanted to ask you today, how do you maintain engagement and inspire others to contribute towards your goals and your success?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. I think this is an important thing to talk about. I've given talks. I still remember first time I come out to talk about that in my life's journey at Boston University commencement. And, as Asian, it's not comfortable to talk about yourself. Some of us who grew up in a more traditional way will know that. But I think this country a lot more open. It's a good thing for people to be able to talk about your failure, success, your vulnerability, etc. So talked about my failures. You talk about success, you have to learn from your failures. What are lessons learned? I talk about the need to surround you with great people like you are doing. I talked about your North Star. Ultimately, what do you want to do and why you want to do it? Everybody have different North Star, but if you want to do research and make the best discovery, that's a great North Star. If you want to do research to come up with drugs that can help people, that's another good one. Or you can do research for research's sake, or for that matter. You want to write a novel, all that stuff. But it's important to remember why you're doing it, what you want to do, and why you're doing it. That's really, really important. So in your career, I think understanding that. So now the definition can be quite broad. I have evolved my thinking from wanting to be a doctor, when I was very young, after the Second World War, seeing poverty, etc., in Asia, to want to do research, to come up with treatment for patients because of my research environment at Brigham, at Harvard, and elsewhere, to wanting to help organize and lead a division from a lab to division to say, I can do these things that will be good for others, to leading departments, ultimately a health system and a medical center, doing what I do. But I think the same remains, even though I still do research, is I want to make a difference. And that's important. So I would say that the North Star is ultimately your compass is where you want to be always thinking about when you make those career decisions.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Dr. Dzau. I'm Kristina Zdancevich, Educational Coordinator at iWiSH, also a member of Cardiovascular Institute, Dr. Joseph Woolab. Thank you so much for such an inspiring talk today and for your generous sharing of your experience. And it's really reflected in me because I'm a physician scientist, an immigrant, and a woman. And I'm very curious. I have a question. In your opinion, what's the most urgent and unmet clinical need for women's health? And where should scientists like us focus their research efforts to contribute most meaningfully over the next decade?
Yeah. First of all, you guys have a great role model, Joe Wu. He himself is an immigrant. He does great research. He's making big impact on research on drug development, and he's a great mentor, all of you. So you're very lucky. You don't have to look too far to look for role models. But it would be great to find a women role model as well, right?
That's
Okay. Um, I think the urgent issue, to me, the most urgent one, is just making sure that the women's health, the sex and biological determinant is top of mind in everybody's mind. Because once you get in top of mind, then everything follows, right? Everything follows, I mean, not only research, but leadership, you name it. So I would say urgently is remember the ecosystem I talked about is to make sure you introduce all this stuff into women's health. You know, I think there's so many, I talked about 3 different conditions that need to be thought about. That is women specific disease, women prevalent disease, and disease that differentially express in women. I think you can pick any one of those areas and try to study them. And by studying any of those diseases or conditions, not only would you address the issues, but you understand the biology mechanism a lot more, right? So I believe top of mind inclusion and knowing where you want to focus on, and of course, leadership. When you think about this, who decides on institutional policy? Who decides on funding policies? Who decides on this? You need leaders. And that's an urgent issue. So I guess I'm not saying there's one urgent issue because I think all this is urgent. But the whole area needs to be moving forward. And you can pick an area of this whole area to say that's my priority.
Thank you.
thank you.
Hi, Dr. Chow. Thank you for your wonderful talk. My name is Hansen Chen, and I'm a stroke researcher. I was wondering whether there are opportunities for early career scientists, especially from international background, who are interested in contributing to broader health and science leadership, to engage with or volunteer in the initiative with the National Academy of Medicine.
Sure. First of all, even though it's a U.S. Academy, we see ourselves as global and international. A lot of work we do, global issues, global health. Secondly, even though our bylaws is US based, 10% of our members every year is international. Third is, if you are like me, a foreign born but a naturalized citizen, you'll be treated like a regular member, not international. So there are many other entry points of this. But I think most importantly is looking at the best talent. So Joe Wu will tell you that I created a program called Emerging Leaders in Health and Medicine. That emerging leaders is to pick the best mind, the most promising leaders, and we are totally ignorant of where they come from or what citizens they have. I won't say we're totally ignorant. We may even give special preference for people like you to say, boy, this person, but the number one thing is excellence. So looking for excellence and then looking for promise and then bring them in. And you know what? We've had now 60 such graduates. 13 of them have been elected to membership. Joe is one of the first classes. So yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity. We also have fellowship and others. So keep an eye out for those. But we always welcome, any bright young people want to come work with us to take a look at what we can do for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dzau. I think we have a couple of questions also in the chat, but I'll just ask the last question, kind of combining some of them. You already greatly answered the majority of the questions. So the last question is kind of a follow-up on how to join the National Academy of Medicine, but in more of a organization, research organizations and nonprofits, how they can partner with the organization of the NAM.
Yeah, you know what? We're always open to collaboration. And I keep referring to my friend Joe Wu because he knows how we work. And certainly, we find many different ways. So when you think about a very clear area that you want to think about whether we can be helpful, just let us know. Our job is to be always open to good ideas, new ideas. So you shouldn't see us as a difficult organization to reach to. I'm easy to reach. We're not a big organization. So there may be things that we cannot do because of capacity or whatever. But there's nothing that we say that a priori we will not do because we want to do the right thing. So by all means, if anybody wants to write me a note, we do have summer interns. Now, we mainly do more work related to policy recommendations, right? We don't run a research laboratory. We run we have scientists that are members. And so they advise what science is going, what the issues are, right? And we think along those lines to enable the nation to have right science policy.
That's really great. Thank you so much, Dr. Dzau, for your time, also for dedicating a little bit more because we are over time. But there are so many people that really wanted to hear from you. Thank you for all of these really inspiring conversation, for your openness to share with us, the behind the scenes and how really decisions are made. From the top. This is really important. We would like to close with one last question, which is probably yes.
My office is calling me and they're very anxious. I'm 7 minutes late.
We are very sorry. Anyways, last question is if you can describe the iWiSH experience in just one word, what this could be.
Energizing.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a
See you
great day.
later.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.